I want to see you all. It's not really church. You don't have to sit in the back to hide. And I've learned it's not just Unitarian Universalists who sit in the back. I know Methodists do, and probably everybody else. Good progress. While we're waiting for Claire, I want to welcome everybody to the mainline Unitarian Church. My name is Reverend Carrie Muller, and I am a retired Unitarian Universalist minister, but I should tell you that I am not officially on staff here. I'm helping out today. So I don't know all the ins and outs of the building, but fortunately we have some folks here who do. Rich Fritzen in the back and Jay Wiley on the sound system. So now we'll wait for the family to get seated. Are you ready? Welcome. Come into this circle of loss. Come into this circle of compassion. Come into this circle of memory. Come into this circle of love. We pause this hour to remember one whom we have lost. We pause to think of those whom we fear losing, those from whom we are separated, those to whom we would extend a helping hand, a caring heart, the will to live. We pause also this hour in hope for life and good living, for love and kind words, for reconciliation, for the support of family and friends, for meaning in our struggle, for wholeness. May the purpose of this hour serve to nurture our memories and our hope. No one entering this world can ever escape sadness. Each in turn must bear burdens, though he or she be rich or poor, and in turn bid loved ones farewell as they set out on life's ventures. Each one must suffer that sad farewell when loved ones embark on the last voyage, and each in turn must take that final journey. But for those who make this life a pledge to the Spirit, there comes the assurance of a victory that shall redeem life's pain. Though our spirit be but the feeble glow of a single flame, for the one who keeps it burning bravely to the end, death is not defeat. We light our chalice today to honor the life and living of Stuart Narrod. So we have gathered here today in this place familiar to some of us to acknowledge the death of Stuart, whom you have known and loved. When someone we care for dies, full of years and love, family and friends gather with sorrow in their hearts. At times when we must face death and loss, we need one another's company. for understanding and support. Just to be together, to look into one another's eyes, takes away some of our loneliness and draws our hearts together in the healing which we can offer one another. At such times, the various faiths that sustain us separately come together in a harmony that acts across all creeds and assures us of the permanence of human goodness and hope. So we have gathered here today in grief and sorrow, but we have also gathered to celebrate a life. We have come together to give thanks that we knew this caring person, to express our gratitude for the days and years we were able to share with him. We are here to remember and memorialize a good life. By remembering the best of this person, by recalling some of his finest qualities, by honoring the principles, values, and dreams which guided his life, some of Stuart's enduring nobility flows into us, that we ourselves might be more noble in the days ahead. So we are here for all of these things, but our first spiritual task is to face, full and unafraid, the reality of this death and the loss that we feel. We have some music from a family favorite. This reading from an Israeli poet known simply as Zelda seems particularly appropriate on this day when we acknowledge the death of and celebrate the life of Stuart. Each of us has a name given to us by God and given to us by our father and mother. Each of us has a name given to us by our stature and our way of smiling, and given to us by our clothes. Each of us has a name given to us by the mountains and given to us by our walls. Each of us has a name given to us by the planets and given to us by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given to us by our sins and given to us by our longings. Each of us has a name given to us by our enemies and given to us by our love. Each of us has a name given to us by our fast days and given to us by our craft. Each of us has a name given to us by the seasons of the year and given to us by our blindness. Each of us has a name given to us by the sea and given to us by our death. It was not my privilege to know Stuart in life. He lived a long and rich life, full of accomplishments and adventure and the love of family and friends. He will long be remembered as a blessing to all who knew him. His family can tell you best about his story and his character and his life as a father, grandfather, spouse, neighbor, citizen, colleague, all of the different roles that he led. Claire, would you like to come up and start sharing?
So I'm going to start telling you a little bit about my dad and the family. I'm going to ask different people to come up and speak. I'll just start out by telling you, Stuart Allen Narrod, my dad, lived to be 93. And when he died, he left his wife, Marion Lee, and 2 daughters, myself and Nancy, and our spouses, Scott and Tony, and 4 grandkids, Peter, Ian, Panzeris, and Tycho, and Fiona, Narrod Malcolm. And Marion Lee, my mom, is joining us right now. She's in the back, and she's joining us, and you'll have a chance to talk to her and go to meeting afterwards. He was the oldest to live from his generation in the Narrod clan, and we have pictures out there of where they were when they fled from Russia. And though he was a single child, he was very close to his cousins, Jean and Rosamond, and they were raised like brothers and sisters. Jean's daughter, Gail, is here today, and she's going to give us, do the mourner's Kaddish for us in Hebrew, and the translations in the back of the program. But he's also survived by nieces and nephews, Danny and Laura, who are both here, and Sharon, who is in Mexico, and Todd's here also in the audience. And we have a lot of cousins, so we're so happy that you also, Judy and Diane and Helen, know all that came. We're very happy. With that, I was going to say, he was born in Chicago, Illinois in April 9th, and in 1925 to Samuel and Clara Narrod. I'm named after Clara. His dad was a general practitioner, and his mom was a cantor in the temple they attended. And both his parents actually fled to Chicago from Russia around the turn of the century. Israel and Pearl Narrod fled from Kiev with 2 sons, Samuel Martin, and 3 daughters, Rose, Hannah, and Bertie. And actually, my grandfather immigrated in 1905, so as we've been going through the papers, we've been able to find this. And he was naturalized along with his family in January 28, 1911. And this was by a declaration of Congress and a letter from my grandfather to my dad. Clara's family, Max Prosterman and Rose Leon, also fled from Fasto, Russia, with their son, Louis, and actually their daughter, Clara, was born in Chicago. I hadn't realized that. And she's who I'm named after. And Gail Brodsky here, we're going to have, who's the grandchild of Lewis, we're going to have, is one of Max and Rose's great-grandchildren, like we are. And I would like you to come up and give the prayer. Yes.
And this great-grandchild is an old lady. That's why I need help getting up the steps. Yitgadal v'yitgadal shemei rabah, v'yalma divra hirute, v'yamli malhute, b'chaye uvmeyachon, uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael, b'yagala uvizman kariv v'rum, amen. Yehei shemei rabah mivra, Le'alam al-mei al-maya, Yit barak, v'yit tabak, v'yit pa'ar, v'yit kaman, v'yit naseh, v'yit hadar, v'yit halev, v'yit halal, shemei kedudasha b'gru, le'ela min kol bi'archata, rishirata, tushbechata, v'nechamata di ran bi'alma v'yamru amen, Yehei shlama rabah min shemaya, V'hayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yamru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yamru amen.
So my father grew up in Chicago, and he went to Sin High School, and he has very fond memories of his time there. Over the last 20 years, he often visited us, and I was lucky to have his best friend from high school living right within 5 miles from us. So he often visited Lenny Kahn. And as Kismet would have it, Lenny's best friend actually was our next door neighbor. So we visited quite a bit, and we would have the men over for lunch, and they would giggle and tell about all kinds of old stories, going to the movies together, parking cars to earn extra cash, and they would tell us lots of stories. And one thing that most of you know who know my dad is that he was a storyteller. You would not meet him with him not telling you a story. And he just loved to tell stories, and he would also reminisce of traveling all over. My grandparents loved to go to the national parks, and my parents took us to the national parks. They would go to Mexico, they went to Cuba, they drove all over the place. But one of my dad's favorite stories was really when he was in Yellowstone. My grandmother would reach up, and they were in a cabin, and she would reach up and pat him on the head, and he thought it was a bear, and he'd tell that story over and over again, how scared he was. And one of my dad's favorite places to go actually was going to the Boundary Waters, canoeing and portaging and fishing and such like that. And it was so special that Scott and I always said we were going to go, and we hadn't planned it, but we had planned to do that this year when Tycho has his hockey goalie camp up near that area. So we're actually going to be going canoeing in the Boundary Waters, and this is a place my dad really loved. My father went to college through the V-12 program and in the Navy training program. In that program, he did stints at Harvard, Bates, Tufts, and eventually graduated from University of Illinois. One thing he loved to do was tell about stories that took place during the Navy program. So Tycho's going to tell one of the stories that Grandpa used to tell us.
This story is a story Grandpa told me about his time in the Navy. One day during training on the destroyer Astoria, his group of sailors had to jump off the side of the ship. It looked very high. After some time, the first sailor jumped off the side into the ocean. He landed with a scream. When he got out of the water, his body was all red from the impact. The sailors looked at each other, then all went to the lower deck to complete their training and jump off the side. Another story that my grandpa told me.
Yeah, we'll do that one. We'll do that one later. My father went on to study biochemistry and got his master's and PhD at University of Illinois in 1948 and his PhD in 1951. From there, he went to the National Institute of Health, NIH, near where we live, in Washington, D.C., to do his postdoc. And he worked at the Dental Institute there, and that's where he met his fellow postdoc there, Marion Lee Freeman. They met at NIH, both doing postdoctoral work there. And he would often tell a story about how this woman lived above him, and often she just would drop one shoe, so he had to go up and find out why only one shoe was being dropped, and that's how they met. And they had lots of fun, good stories about that, but they fell in love, and Scott's going to read a letter. And my family loved to write letters, so we actually have their original letters, love letters.
Hang on a second here. Okay, here's a letter from Stuart to Marion Lee dated July 7th, 1957. On the original it says, Sunday. Hi, sweetheart. As usual, I am awake early this morning. The sunshine is really glaring into my room off the lake. I am afraid it's going to be a very warm day, which will make the wedding more uncomfortable. The trip was pleasant and uneventful. I had lunch on the plane, and it sure was good. They served steak, fruit cocktail, and fruit salad. I must confess I had a terrible time sitting on the plane before it took off, which seemed like an exceedingly long wait. Looking at you through the window, I had the urge to jump off the plane and run to you. I sure was glad when they finally shut the door, for I don't think I could have trusted myself to stay aboard much longer while looking at you. I haven't any plans since my mother is going to the hospital tomorrow morning. Ted Chiota phoned, and he is in town with his family. We might drive down to Champaign for the day to see some of our friends at the university. I'll let you know when I'm able to return. Hope it's very shortly, for I already miss you too much. All my love, Stu.
So they married August 23rd, 1958 in Newport, Delaware, and we have cousins who lived very near there, growing up here, in the Newport, Delaware Calvary United Presbyterian Church. After that, they soon moved to Boston, where my dad took a fellowship at Brandeis University, and my mom taught at Harvard Medical School. Later, they moved to Oxford for 2 years, where my dad did a second postdoc in biochemistry under Sir Walter Krebs at Oxford. And my mom continued doing her work in cancer at Christ Church. And while they were there, they traveled throughout Europe. There is another funny story my dad loved to tell, was that Sir Walter Krebs, every night, one night, Scotland Yard came over to arrest him. And it turned out that every night, when he got home, it was his job to rinse out the nappies and to hang them up to dry on the roof. And Scotland Yard thought that he was signaling the Germans across the border. And that was one thing my dad loved to tell. My parents then moved back to Bethesda again, and they continued to work at NIH, and that's where my sister and I were born. And when we were born, my grandfather wrote another letter to my dad, what it was like to be a grandfather. Scott's going to read that. Oh, okay.
That's good. A slight change in the program. I'll read the letter first, and then we'll have the musical interlude. So it's a letter that Claire's grandfather wrote to Stu on being a grandfather. Dear children, like all grandpas, I have been bragging, and the rubber stamp question was popped at me. How do you feel being a grandpa? Now these are the moments when you cannot think of the right words to say, and I met up with those moments, and so I began to analyze the reasons for my inabilities. I came to this conclusion. Certain feelings, experiences, and factors are inexpressible, unexplainable, and indescribable. You find that all through life, even in the sciences and arts, and even in religion. Describe color to a blind man. Do you think you can make him understand? Try fire, or even take the subject of time. You know it exists, but do you know how to explain it to someone who doesn't understand it? Can the scientist explain electricity to somebody who doesn't understand it? Can the religious man explain piety? Yes, he will say that, what a man executes or follows the sanctimonious customs, but is that piety? The feeling of being a grandpa falls in all the mentioned categories. Yes, rules do come into possession of. You could understand it, and no one can explain it all to you. All, I will say, is since then I came into possession of that feeling. I discovered a glorious, fresh sense of worth. Another segment of my life began. I cherish it, and I am very grateful to you. I love you with a love that legislates out of the human heart and not a push-button system. Mother has been happy since she heard the news and has never stopped talking about it. You, both being of culture and perspicacity, that's a word that we don't use very often these days, we expect that a little taught to astound the world. Since you are both susceptible to the power of science, I am sure she will be one of the greatest scientists. May God bless her and give her that power, and much more. Tell me a little more about her. Is she physically perfect? Who does she look like? I have a feeling of that sensation at every moment her bright shining face should come through the door. Of course, you can't understand that grandpa sensation till come to possess it. With the greatest love of both of you, and especially to my little grandchild, Dad.
Hello, I'm Fiona, and I'm going to be singing Loch Lomond. I'm not sure who it's by, but okay. By yon bonny banks and by yon bonny braes, where the sun shines bright on Loch Lomond, where me and my true love wherever want to be, on that bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. Oh, ye'll take the high road and I'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland before thee, but me and my true love won't ever want to be on that bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. I mind where we parted in yon shady glen, on the steep, steep side of Ben Lomond, where in deep purple hues the highland hills we viewed, and the moon coming out in the gloaming. Oh, ye'll take the high road and I'll take the low road. 'Twill all be in Scotland before ye, but me and my true love won't ever meet again on that bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. The wee birdies sing and the wild flowers spring, and in sunshine the waters are sleeping, but the broken heart will ken no second spring again, and the world does not know our greeting. For ye'll take the high road and I'll take the low road. 'Twill all be in Scotland before ye, but me and my true love won't ever meet again on that bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond.
So while my parents were in Washington, they met this very famous man who's very famous to the Unitarians, A. Powell Davis. And it's a man they greatly admired who came into national prominence in the U.S. through his liberal activism, advocating civil rights for African Americans and women, and ethical stands against the post-nuclear proliferation and the methods that were employed against the American government during the era of McCarthyism. And I don't know if any of you ever heard this story, but my mom actually went to the McCarthy hearings, and she was actually thrown out because she thought it was hilarious, and she got thrown out of court during those days. But one thing was that he was a minister at All Souls Unitarian Church in D.C., and my parents decided that's the community they wanted to attend, so it was a place where they could raise both my sister and I, and raise us by celebrating both their faiths, being Jewish, my dad, and my mom being Presbyterian. That's when we started attending the Unitarian Church. We're going to have a saying by A. Powell Davis.
This prayer is from a little book called The Language of the Heart by A. Powell Davies. Help us to remember, O God of mercy and compassion, how many have known the darkness of this valley as we do now, and that their grief, like ours, was bleak and lonely. They too believed that home was gone and that the sorrows were beyond all healing. And yet the darkness passed, and the bitterness at last was gone. The love we can no longer give to our beloved, help us, O God, to give to those who need it. Make our compassion deeper, our sympathy wider. Let our sorrows melt away our bitterness and teach us to be gentle. May we be saved from frozenness of heart. If so much that is precious can so soon be lost, let us cherish what remains, and let us be the nurture of things precious in the lives of others. When there is nothing to guide us in the present, may we be guided by the insights of the past. Let not bereavement blind us to what is good and lovely still. Let us see it through our tears until again we see it plainly. Whatever we have known and loved is ours while life shall last. May we see that what we love becomes a part of us, is interfused with our lives, blended with mind and memory and joined to our souls. May we resolve that the good we knew in those who have gone from us shall live in us and be passed from one generation to another. When we do not know and cannot see, may we put our trust in things we cannot see. Even in this life, all about us and within us, there is mystery, and yet the mystery shines, and in its life we see the beautiful and the good. May we have faith that it is not otherwise beyond the limits of our sight, that beauty endures, that goodness reigns, and that God's other name is love. Amen. And now we have a voice from our neighborhood.
So, I just want to quickly say, in 1963, my dad became a professor at the Medical College of Pennsylvania, and my parents moved to Pennsylvania, and they moved to the home that we grew up in. And they searched for a place to live, and they found, in the process of searching, they found a wonderful property in Wayne, backing up to a large park that all of our neighbors here know that we all grew up in and loved, the McCaig Nature Center. So we're going to be putting a memorial bench for that. But we were so fortunate to have that woods. It was our private playground. And we loved to go hiking and bird watching and building dams, camping, exploring, sledding. I know one of my closest friends is here, Andy. We spend many hours there doing that. And we also spend many hours playing with our neighborhood kids. Billy, Johnny, Bobby, Krista and Wanda, and Peter, who's no longer with us. But we have here Luella Lucci, who has been our next door neighbor for nearly 50 years. And she's going to say something about my parents. She's not an old lady.
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. I was a friend of the Narrods for around 50 years. When I talk about the Narrods, I talk about Stuart and Marion. They seem to be inseparable as I can see. When we first moved into the neighborhood, we were the first African Americans on the street, and we had a little drama. But the Narrods took us under their wings and help us to get used to the neighborhood. Mr. Narrod was a determined man, you know. He loved his family. He was a good friend. He was faithful to his church here. And to me, he seemed to go by, him and Mrs. Narrod, go by the traditions of this church, you know? And this church is open. You know, they accept everyone. They welcome everyone. And so when we moved into the neighborhood, I was afraid for my children. But Mrs. Narrod would bring her girls over to play with my kids. Then when they were up in the circle, cul-de-sac you would call it, Mrs. Narrod would be up there watching to see everything would go all right. Then I would look up and Mr. Narrod, tall Mr. Narrod, was standing behind her. And it seems like when they made decisions, it was always the two of them. And that sort of encouraged me because they seemed to be a very fine couple and a loving couple. You know, they were good to their friends, their neighbors, their family, the community, and the church. Now, Mr. Narrod and my husband's birthday came in April. So sometimes we were invited over to their house to celebrate their birthday, or he would come over to our house. Now, one time I gave a party, and I said, I am going to serve soul food. So I had collard greens, sweet potatoes, macaroni, and all that good stuff that we, as African Americans, love. And I'm sitting there, and Mr. Narrod, I said, Mr. Narrod, how do you like the food? Oh, fine, fine. And I saw him go back for a second helping and so forth. And I said, and then my other neighbors, you know, they charmed in and they were eating, and we had a good time. And that was one thing. When the Narrods gave family affairs or birthdays, they would always invite us. And she had a sister that would always come, and she would be running around taking pictures, and I think she's deceased now, but I also liked her. You know, they seem to be very good individuals. But I want to say that Mrs. Narrod became a president of the Mainline Chrysanthemum Club, and so one day she said, why don't you come with me to a meeting? And I didn't realize that when I went to this meeting, I would be the only one there of color. And she opened the doors and I said, oh my gosh, I'm helping her to integrate this committee. And so, but there was always things like that. But I tell you, I will miss Mr. Narrod because he was a determined man. Even when we were all getting older on the street, he would be determined to do the maintenance. He had retired, and he was determined to make repairs on the house, do the landscaping, you know. But as he grew old, and we all grew older on the street, his ability to do things declined. And that was kind of sad, but we all, at this point, are older on the street now, some of us. So I want to say I'll miss him. He was a good debater. We had a lot of conversation that got kind of heated, but Mrs. Narrod kept us in control. And I you know, it's sad because on the street we are losing good friends. And we all know that our lives come to an end here on earth, but we don't want them, but it's sad to see your friends go and you're still here. So I want to thank Clara for asking me to speak a little bit about my friends and wish them well.
And as my grandparents used to travel a lot with my dad, we did the same thing and went to annual trips to Rehoboth Beach, Ocean City, visit the family in Western PA. We love to go out in nature, go to Hawk Mountain, watching the hawks migrate, hiking parts of the Appalachia Trail, Horseshoe Trail, canoeing down the Brandywine, fossil hunting on the Delaware Canal and Calvert Cliffs. I just have such fond memories of doing that and going all over the world with my parents, to Mexico, England, France, Switzerland, going to all over the States. They just love to travel. And that's a little bit about growing up, and I would love later on if other family friends want to speak at the end to speak. I wanted just to transition to 1 year as we got older and we were actually in high school. One day my dad decided to bring home a pet for us. And we had a pet named Taffy that was one of his patients actually gave to him. And Taffy soon became a huge fixture in our family. And I think I have a picture actually of Bobby, Johnny, and Billy with us like the day we brought home the dog for the first time. It's in that circulating pictures. Tycho, can you come up and give a little story?
Another story that my grandpa told me was, so Grandpa and his family, including their dog Taffy, would often take hikes into the woods behind the house. One time, on the way back home, they noticed Taffy was missing. So they looked and looked for her around the woods. After a long time, they couldn't find her. But when they got home, there she was waiting at the door with her wagging her tail. Probably wondering why it took everyone so long.
And while they lived in Wayne, my parents actually attended Mainline Unitarian Church since actually the early 60s. And it's so wonderful to see friends from church that I grew up with there. It's just really wonderful. We on a regular basis, every summer we would go at Labor Day weekend to Camp Carson, Takawau. I'm sure you all remember these, going sailing and that. My dad loved to sail. He taught us how to sail. We would go canoeing and swimming. It was one of our favorite things to do at the end of each summer. At the Mainline Unitarian Church, it was very much part of my parents' family. My dad partook in the Men's Alliance. Both of my sister and I were both married here, and actually we had our kids' naming ceremony here 10 years ago. January 19th was here when we named them. My family was really lucky to live very close to several cousins. So my Aunt Louise and Uncle Todd, with Danny and Laura, we got to visit them at regular places, going to holidays and family events. One thing Danny and I were talking about last night was the barbecues. We always, every family event, whether it was a birthday, a holiday, we got together. And Danny wanted to come up and speak a little bit about what it was like growing, and if Todd and Laura wanted to welcome.
I'm definitely a little moved here, so Tycho and Fiona, just the pointers of my story are, if I forget, it's chess, car, chainsaw, train, and brains. So if I forget, just say those things. So we have a wonderful family, always really enjoyed getting together. Some of my fondest memories when we were young, we would go to the country club and hang out and eat, and that's where Uncle Stu taught me to play chess. I thought that was so sweet. We would have so much fun together, just hanging out, doing things like that. When I was 6 years old, at one of the parties that we had, and yeah, Claire, we had some great family parties, definitely. But when I was 6 years old, Uncle Stu taught me to drive. He actually just walked outside, put me in his car, drove down the street. I'm steering the wheel. So that was kind of interesting. That was definitely a fun time. I really liked that. It was wild doing that. Later on in life, I would come help out with some of the landscaping stuff.
So actually, you made me think of a really good joke. Because I was thinking, what's a really good Uncle Stu joke? He just would kind of, just roll these jokes off his tongue that were pretty funny. But I remember there was always an argument about the bushes. Aunt Mary and Lee would want the bushes cut nice and tight. Uncle Stu wanted them as high as they could be. He liked the neighbors. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he wanted to see the woods. So he told me one time. He sat me down. He told me about the bush, and he's like, well. He's like, I'll tell you. One time I was doing the bushes, Aunt Mary and Lee, she wanted me to cut the bushes right down. I wanted them as high as possible, so we compromised and I cut the bushes. So I thought that was funny. Also, some of the fondest memories I remember having, or one really good one, as a family, we went out together and went to the Franklin Institute. I remember going through the human heart, and that was pretty fun with Tycho and Fiona and everyone. We had a really good time. And I'd go, and Uncle Stu would run the train. He was the guy that would, the train that moved all of 5 feet back and forth, but he would actually run the train, and he was so happy about doing that, and just, really letting the kids would love it, and had lots of fun doing that. And that takes me to, I think I switched my stories here, brains and chains, but one time we were in the Franklin Institute. If you've ever been there, do you remember you'd go and they'd have a little science experiment and everyone would sit around and they'd start doing things? Well, we're there with Uncle Stu as a family. We're there, and some guy's doing a science experiment. Uncle Stu just walks right up to the guy while the guy's doing his own experiment with a full audience, just walks right up, and he starts pulling brains out of this drawer, and he's just giving us our own tour himself. This is a normal brain. This is an abnormal brain. He was a very determined person, and he would do what he felt, and he would just go right up and do it. I thought that was wild. And then, the chainsaw was just one time we were out doing yard work, and you couldn't stop that guy. I mean, I'm out with my friend, and this was only a couple years ago too, and we're chopping up a tree and rolling logs up the hill, and he had to come out and chainsaw with the boys. We couldn't stop him, and it was very funny. But just some funny stories. Again, have a wonderful family, so thank you everyone for coming out.
I'm going to read this because I forget things. My mother, my aunt, and Stuart were first cousins, but my mom always told me that they were raised like brother and sisters. When my mother was 16, her father passed away, and she and her sister had to move back east. Of course, Stuart stayed in Chicago with his parents. They kept in touch over the years. The girls were crazy about him. They followed his career, and they enjoyed bragging. My mother just loved to brag about Stuart. My brother and I have fond memories of visiting Aunt Clara, Uncle Doc, and Stuart when we were kids. When Stuart and Marion Lee moved to Philadelphia, we saw more of them. And Stuart liked to remind me that he carried me on his shoulders when I was a little girl. And that's a nice memory for me. That's all.
Though my parents were passionate researchers, one of the things that troubled them for a long time was that they both had a PhD, but to do studies on humans, they had to work with somebody who had an MD. So my dad actually went back to school in the 70s to get his medical degree. Before then, he was a biochemist. And he continued to teach, and he was the head of the department of biochemistry at Women's Medical College during that time there. And in 1976, he graduated from Women's Medical College with a medical degree. He was oldest in the class. He was in his mid-50s. And after he graduated, he did a residency at Albert Einstein Medical Center and completed training, which he completed in 1979. And this was followed by a fellowship in rheumatology at Hahnemann Hospital, which he completed in 1981. And we have here his mentor, Don Freeman, is going to talk a little bit about what it was like, because they developed a great friendship beyond the mentoring period.
Afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Claire for the honor and privilege of speaking here and going through some thoughts about Stu. It's a wonderful opportunity. Stu really was a wonderful and cherished friend and colleague. Our birthdays actually were 3 days apart, so that, a lot of April birthdays here, I think. And that sort of added to our connection. I first met him when he was a rheumatology fellow at Hahnemann Hospital, where I taught residents and fellows, and Stu was one of the fellows. I went there once a week, and I always enjoyed that, and I enjoyed working with Stu. But I was amazed that he had decided on such a very admirable career change in his midlife. It's hard enough to get through medical school in your 20s, let alone your 50s. So that decision to do that spoke to me about his courage and his ability to chart a new track and lead biochemistry, which of course he was so much a part of his life. I always felt that he was very eager to learn, and that was the characteristic he continued to exhibit really throughout his career and throughout his life. He was able to apply the principles of scientific inquiry and the need to question as he practiced medicine, and particularly in rheumatology, because there are always a lot of unknowns in our field. I always sensed that he cared so much for his patients and was dedicated to their healing. He always liked talking about his work, and we enjoyed sharing medical experiences and also medical challenges. It came as no surprise to me that after his retirement from rheumatology, that Stu volunteered to be a docent at the Franklin Institute, the bastion of science, as we all know, on the Parkway in Philadelphia. And again, I thought how wonderful that he was in a position to answer the questions of curious children and curious adults as well. I could really envision him imparting information and his wisdom with enthusiasm and animation. The fact that he kept his mind going by doing this productive work and contributing to the world in such a lovely way was an admirable alternative to just sitting at home and doing Sudoku puzzles. He was very warm and caring. He would always ask me how I was doing and what I was doing, and really I sensed that he really wanted to know and just wasn't making conversation. As you all know, he had a dazzling sense of humor, although admittedly sometimes it was a little corny. But he kidded me all the time, and I really loved that. He and Marion showed me warm and welcoming hospitality many times with lunches and dinners at their home, and those lunches and dinners just were filled with fascinating conversation and really joy. It's just lovely to have those memories. Stu also loved his family and was so proud of all the members in it. He loved recounting everyone's accomplishments, those of his daughters, his grandchildren, and Marion's also. His eyes would actually light up when talking about them. And of course, this included Marion, who was a very loving spouse and partner and colleague. How sustaining his love of his family was to him. And finally, Stu to me was a model of resilience, bouncing back from health setbacks again and again. Many other people would have given up, but not Stu. Starting a totally different and challenging career in midlife also required a lot of resilience. I really thought he was a replica of the ever-ready battery bunny who just kept on going and going, but in human form. A word to Marion out there, streaming with us at this moment. as we remember Stu. You're always the rock by Stu's side. You were always there for him, always listening, always caring, and always supporting. You understood his love of knowledge and his search for the truth and his inquiry, and supported him as he evolved continuously. What a shining example of a loving relationship. I'm sorry for the grief that you must feel for such a really significant loss. And so I share in our goodbye to Stu and our remembrance of him. I will certainly miss the friendship that we shared, but I will cherish and honor and celebrate the model he was of how to age meaningfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. My dad really believed the importance of giving back to the community. So after he retired, you heard that he volunteered at the Franklin Institute, but he also volunteered at the Claymont Clinic on Substance Abuse in Wilmington, Delaware. He was an active member of the Delaware Medical Society until his death. I notified the board of his death. He was not only a docent at the Franklin Institute, but he often joined my mom, who was volunteering at Longwood Gardens. So I think many of the neighbors have seen the chrysanthemums and all the paraphernalia and plants my mom would bring back from Longwood. It was one of her favorite places to do, and my dad would be there with her each week where she volunteered. My dad was a very proud grandfather, as Don said. He loved to play and tell stories and jokes with his grandkids. And we actually have an excerpt from the naming ceremony, which we're going to play, but unfortunately the video is not the voice is not working, so my husband's going to kind of say what he remembers. But you'll see my dad in there, and he's talking about what it means for him to be a grandfather.
So this is a video that was taken right here 11 years ago today, and in this church, in the room over there. Many of you were here. And this is a almost faithful transcription of what he was saying during his time. People took turns to say. We had two wonderful grandchildren, and they were great guys. They are great guys, but we needed two more, and these two showed up, and we couldn't be happier. So this is what he said before he sat down. So he doubled up.
Yeah, there he's doing that. So those are our kids now when they were first born. And Tycho and Fiona really had a great opportunity to see their grandparents. We lived about 2.5, 3 hours away, and we regularly came down to visit them. And we just love to come here and see. When we go across the Susquehanna River, we were seeing going over the river into the woods to Grandma's house we go, just many fond memories. My kids had opportunity to also grow up with the children of the grandparents, their grandkids, and get to play with them. So it was really good, and they had the same wonderful memories of the nature center, the McCaig Nature Center. So that was, I just want to say the woods behind our house was very special to our family. One of the things, we celebrate the holidays, so that was one thing that was really important. Baking was always a very big, important part of our family. Was baking, making mustard, making all the family recipes. So we have those foods out at the reception. All but one, which we have left at home, was my dad's favorite, which is almond brittle. So that one we have a big box at home, but we didn't bring that. But please feel free to have that. One thing I want to say is we love doing Advent calendars in our family household. And one thing very special to us, we were hanging up the ornaments on the tree of the Advent calendar this year. You have the box, Scott. And I forgot that we asked my dad to write notes to the kids. And so Tycho's going to read the ones that we found the bottom of the Advent calendar this year, the day he died, on December 24th.
So one of these notes says, "My very best friends are Tycho and Fiona." Another one says, "My best friend is Marion." Wait, what? Marion Lee. And another one says, "We had a dog named Taffy." I know. And then this.
So that was kind of special. So even though we weren't there when my dad died, they did live across the street for us, and the kids got to see them on a regular basis for a short period. And they would go there every Friday after school and play with them. My dad also played chess with Tycho, and even one of those occasions he beat him, but not for long. Tycho's become quite the chess player. So that's one thing. So I wanted to say, leaving the home, as all you know, was really difficult for my parents. And their minds were deteriorating. It became pretty unsafe to be there. So we hold this celebration of life here at Mainline Unitarian Church, and we're going to have a bench in the woods, which we grew up with, so they can always be back home, even though they aren't there now. So we're going to have Fiona sing a song, Country Roads. So picture it being Pennsylvania, Schuylkill River, and Appalachian Mountains, but she's going to sing Country Roads for us.
West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is old there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, flowing like a breeze. Country roads take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, mountain mama, take me home, country roads. All my memories gather round her, miner's lady, stranger to blue water, dark and dusty, painted on the sky, misty taste of moonshine, teardrops in my eye. Country roads take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, mountain mama, take me home. Country roads. I hear her voice in the morning hour, she calls me. Radio reminds me of my home far away. Driving down the road, I get a feeling that I should have been home yesterday. Yesterday, country roads take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, mountain mama, take me home. Country roads take me home. Country roads.
Now, the order of service says that memories are welcome from others, and indeed they are, but we're going to ask you to save them for over the meal because it's already running late. These words are also from A. Powell Davies. When sorrow comes, let us accept it simply as a part of life. Let the heart be open to pain. Let it be stretched by it. All the evidence we have says this is the better way. An open heart never grows bitter or if it does, it cannot remain so. In this desolate hour, there's an outcry, a clenching of the hands upon emptiness, a burning pain of bereavement, a weary ache of loss. But anguish, like ecstasy, is not forever. There comes a gentleness, a returning quietness, a restoring stillness, and this too is a door to life. Here also is a deepening of meaning, and it can lead to dedication, a going forward to the triumph of the soul. And in that process will come a deepening inward knowledge that in the final reckoning, all is well. Well, it is done. We have bid loving farewell to Stuart. Let us honor his life by living ourselves more nobly and lovingly in the days ahead. And as you return to the routines of your lives, dear friends, go in great peace, and may an abiding peace go with you. We're going to end with a song. If you need help with the words, it's number 100 in the gray hymnal in the seat ahead of you, Peace Like a River. Fiona, will you get us started?
I've got peace like the river, I got peace like the river, I got peace like the river in my soul. I got peace like the river, I got peace like the river, I got peace like the river in my soul. I got joy like a fountain, I got joy like a fountain, I got joy like a fountain in my soul. I got joy like a fountain, I got joy like a fountain, I got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I got love like an ocean, I got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I got love like an ocean, I got love like an ocean in my soul. I got pain like an arrow, I got pain like an arrow, I got pain like an arrow in my soul. I got pain like an arrow, I got pain like an arrow, I got pain like an arrow in my soul. I got tears like the raindrops, I got tears like the raindrops, I got tears like the raindrops in my soul. I've got tears like the raindrops, I got tears like the raindrops, I got tears like the raindrops in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain, I got strength like a mountain, I got strength like a mountain in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain, I got strength like a mountain, I got strength like a mountain in my soul.
And now the time has come to share a memory and a meal together. Amen.
So there is a reception with a lot of our family favorite foods outside, and please join us.